Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen, and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back, check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. 40 years ago, no one had ever seen anything quite like Ghostbusters, a movie populated with hilarious and charming heroes and genuinely scary ghosts. A story that made you laugh one minute and scream the next. A big-budget comedy festooned with elaborate special effects. Despite the unconventional concept, director Ivan Reitman and co-star Harold Ramis refashioned Dan Aykroyd's original story treatment of interdimensional ghost hunters into a contemporary comedy set in New York City. Bill Murray and Ernie Hudson eventually filled out the titular quartet, alongside rising stars Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis, with improvising galore and guffaws aplenty. Other legendary names who worked on the other side of the camera included composer Elmer Bernstein, production designer John DeCure, cinematographer Laszlo Kovacs, and editor Sheldon Kahn, as well as Oscar winner Richard Edlund, who had recently formed his own special effects studio after his triumphs with Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Backed by a clever marketing campaign and accompanied by Ray Parker Jr.'s unforgettable theme song, the movie was a critical and box office smash when it opened in early June 1984. It was an instant sensation, one that spun off into animated series, comic books, video games, mountains of merchandise, as well as multiple sequels. Grab your proton packs, jump into the Ecto-1, and stay puffed as we celebrate 4 decades of Who You Gonna Call? Ghostbusters. 40 years of ghost busting. Let's bring everybody in, because I've got an awesome panel, and let's say hello to Ashley Lamers.
Hi.
Mackenzie Parker.
Hello.
And Daniel Millhouse.
Hey.
We are here to chat about Ghostbusters from 1984, celebrating its 40th anniversary. And along the way, we'll also chat about the sequels, which include Ghostbusters 2 from 1989, Ghostbusters Answer the Call 2016, Ghostbusters Afterlife, and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire came out this year, 2024. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and a welcome. I'm curious to hear, this, as I do with all of these shows, where you encountered Ghostbusters for the first time. Maybe how old you were, who you saw it with, etc. Daniel, do you mind if we start with you?
I do not mind. I honestly can't remember how old I was when I saw it, because this is probably one of my core memories. Ghostbusters is, one of those desert island movies for me, that Indiana Jones and Back to the Future. So I feel like I've seen this one from since I could remember. It's been in my own personal zeitgeist for so long that anytime I put on this movie, even rewatching it for this panel, it's my comfort food and I will doze off. But that's not because it's bad or anything. It's because it's so comforting to me.
Mackenzie.
I'm fairly similar. I don't remember a time before Ghostbusters, like Batman and Back to the Future and things like that. It was all of those things were in the same toy box. I'm having just rewatched it. I don't think I've actually watched it in about 15 years or more. I realized as I sat down to actually watch it, I'm like, man, it's been a minute. I had some of the toys growing up. I definitely watched the cartoon a little bit. It's definitely, core memory, definitely an early strong memory for me.
Cool. Ashley.
Well, the first one came out in 84, so I was a year old. I don't remember. I do remember the cartoon. I remember watching the cartoon a lot, and I remember all of the the ecto cooler, high C and stuff like that. I think I remember the marketing more than I remember actually watching the movie itself. But then all of a sudden I'd have little images from the movie come to my memory. Like, but I don't know. I was a kid. That's all I know.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I was around in the 80s and I was, going to movies. And I remember this one playing in my little town in Colorado at the same
Tell us
theater.
what it was like.
It was like this, kids. I mean, it was a single screen. It's where I saw Nightmare on Elm Street the same year. I saw The Terminator. Daniel and I talked about that. And this one, as you said, Ashley, like I remember the promotional aspect of it. I remember the song being omnipresent. I remember the posters and all the marketing and things like that. And it does feel like the second it arrived, it has always been there. Like it just immediately became immersed into pop culture on every level. And it elevated its actors to superstar status. Bill Murray was definitely a known quantity, Dan Aykroyd, Sigourney Weaver, but suddenly they were in a monster hit. It kind of changed their careers. Same thing for Ivan Reitman. He'd been making, movies in Canada, and then he started making, comedies like Meatballs and Stripes. But Ghostbusters was huge. And going back and watching it this time, I was surprised by how many special effects there are at a time when it was pretty new. Like the things that were happening on screen were pretty unusual. When you think of Ghostbusters, what is the first image that comes to mind or scene when Ghostbusters is said?
In our family lore, there's a memory of me being absolutely terrified by the librarian, or the library ghost,
and rightly so.
Yeah, there's a lot of these movies that I also conflate with the Poltergeist movies because of the special effects are very similar. That and Slimer, because Slimer was such a big cultural icon.
And I read that he was actually called Onion Head throughout the original script, and it wasn't until the cartoon that he really cut his name of Slimer, even though he does slime Bill Murray and he has that famous line.
It's a weird thing because I think the animated series came about the same time for me, as the movies. Like I absorbed them at about the same time. So it's weird to go from the cartoon where Slimer is like this consistent, friendly character that they refer to as Slimer. And then you watch the movies and you're like, why is he not like hanging out with them?
I think those first two movies have iconic, like, you talked about Slimer, Stay Puft Marshmallow is an iconic. And then the second one has that whole Statue of Liberty. Yes. I think that's also iconic. But the image that always comes to my mind is actually Rick Moranis at the restaurant banging on that window and that like slide down that he does and that no one pays him any attention. That really
so
sticks
incredible.
with me.
Yes.
Or what's his line about? He also has that whole scene is what sticks with me. Like the party scene. Don't they have a line about him being an accountant or something?
Yes.
At the same time.
He invites only clients to his party because it becomes a tax deduction then.
Did somebody bring the dog? Or who brought the dog?
Yeah.
Yep. Ashley?
Yeah. I think the song, for sure.
Yep.
Holy shit, I'm blanking on the car. What do we call that car?
The Ecto One?
Yes, the Ecto One.
It is the name of my iPhone.
Love that.
Yay!
But yeah, I think of the song, I think of the car, and I think of Slimer when I think of the first one.
The song is one of those that it's ridiculously catchy, of course. And apparently Ray Parker Jr., like this was like, the 60th entry that Ivan Reitman had entertained. And Ray Parker wrote it in, I think, like, a few days. And that logo is genius. That was initially supposed to be just in the movie. It wasn't intended to be part of the marketing campaign. But then they realized that it was such a great piece. They're like, nope, that's all we're going to do. And that was the poster. Like that was the teaser poster, was just that image saying coming to save the world this summer.
The black background, right?
Yep. Exactly right.
And a tattered t-shirt I saw as a kid with that emblem on it, oh my God.
Yeah.
Was this one of the first times that you had seen actors like Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis?
Would have been the entry point for me because
I think it was.
Yeah. With SNL and whatnot, that was like before my time.
Dan Aykroyd from the Coneheads for sure was my first entry point. Bill Murray, probably this.
or Caddyshack.
Yep.
Yeah, that was definitely on when I was a kid.
What
So was Meatballs.
And Stripes.
Stripes. Oh my God, Stripes. Yes.
What do we think about Peter Venkman?
Oh, what an asshole.
We're watching it. My wife Michelle's like, this is problematic. Like,
Oh, very.
Yes. And there were multiple points where like I'm doing notes on my phone and I'm like, this is not accurate science. This is not accurate psychology. They're like, who wrote this? Who did this?
Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, that's who wrote it.
Fuckers.
Yep.
There's a thing with Bill Murray. His characters are, I feel like we crossed through a barrier in time at some point, and now I look at his roles in this as in Meatballs, and it's just he comes across as a creep. And I know that he initially his inspiration was Bugs Bunny, and when you know that, it kind of makes sense that it's like, oh, these movies take place in a world where they're all cartoons, and he's just this like wacky scoundrel. But like in the context of the real world, it is just like it's rough.
That brings another iconic image to my mind is just when he, is electrocuting his patient.
Yeah.
Like how
that's how we're introduced to him.
Yeah.
That's true. How that gum comes out of his mouth is always stuck in my brain for some reason. That how it shoots out is fantastic.
And Dan Aykroyd, who also wrote the script, he plays Ray. And the initial idea for the script was that it was going to be set in space, and there were going to be, like two Ghostbusters who just kind of like trekked around the universe, tracking down supernatural entities. And it was Ivan Reitman who said, you know what, I think if we bring it to Earth, I think if we add another Ghostbuster or two, keep it in modern day. And he's the one, Ivan Reitman's the one who brought in Harold Ramis. And he had worked with Ramis on Stripes and Meatballs. And so everybody kind of like knew each other in that circle. And so there was a real trust because Bill Murray was notoriously improvising his lines. And you could see, I can imagine another screenwriter, especially if it's a co-star, you're like, hey, I wrote this. Could you say the line that I actually wrote? But Bill Murray apparently just took it to another level every single time.
Is this one of the first kind of SNL movies?
Well, you had Animal House with John Belushi. That was his kind of breakout.
When was Blues Brothers?
Blues Brothers was 81, I think.
Oh, okay.
80 or 81. And then, like I say, Bill Murray had already done Meatballs and Stripes and Caddyshack before this. So he was definitely a rising comedy star. And somebody we hadn't seen much on the big screen was Rick Moranis. And I love the fact that he's kind of the cartoon of this movie.
Yeah.
And just owns it.
He's such a gem in these movies. I will say that Venkman, even though he's a scoundrel, as you said, he does have one of my favorite lines. And there's so many like good one-liners in this franchise, but when he's holding the baby in part 2 and he goes, well, he's ugly. I love insulting a baby like that. Fantastic.
Oh, there's a reason Bill Murray was has had the career he's had. There's some really funny stuff. I always laugh when there's a part where he goes, call it fate, call it karma. And it almost sounds like he's about to break into song because the score underneath him is like elevating with him, and I always think he's about to start singing, and he never does. But it's hilarious.
He's the cool Ghostbuster.
He is, yeah.
He is the cool Ghostbuster, and I think that's kind of the great chemistry between Ramis and Aykroyd and Murray and Ernie Hudson. Is that they all bring a different quality to it. It doesn't feel like you get three Venkmans. It's everybody, and I love how like grounded Spengler is, and how like deep into the science he's like, that's what turns him on.
Yes. Yeah.
Sigourney Weaver too. She's like a statue in that movie. It's amazing.
Well, and she had done, Alien was 79, and then she'd mostly done, serious roles up until that point, Year of Living Dangerously. And then this was kind of like her first foray into comedy. And she's really terrific in it. And yes, she's called upon to be kind of beautiful a lot of the time, but she also manages, like her her dealings with Venkman are
Mhm.
funny, and she clearly can take care of herself.
Yes.
And I can't remember. She's didn't return for Afterlife, did she?
Yes.
She's at the very end in the tag. With
Oh,
her.
that's
after the end credits. Yeah.
I was thinking of the tag for
she's
Answer
in
the Call.
She's in Answer the
Remember
Call
that
as well.
one.
Yeah, but yes, her Dana is, you know, kind of proves to be one of the key elements because she is
The gatekeeper.
she's the gatekeeper.
That's right.
And
Yep.
You
And
got to
Rick
think of the
Moranis.
sexual innuendo.
Yeah,
That's how you
right.
remember.
see, I don't know what that's all about. I have no idea what's the
The
sexuality.
phallic and the sapphic representation.
Let's talk about like the special effects and things like that kind of surround this movie.
The whole library scene is fantastic with the cards flying out the drawers and the ghost.
I got chills this time.
It sets
When I
the
watched
tone for the kind of movie we're going to watch.
Yeah.
Yes, it's going to be creepy and scary, and it's going to be funny.
Yeah, him getting the ooze off his fingers, trying to use everything.
He's just wiping it on the books. Yeah.
I know there's been some some debate about whether this movie is a horror or a comedy, but like I think it's absolutely a horror and a comedy. There's so many elements that are both. It's very animated, but at the same time, that stuff, man, some of that's. We'll talk about Ghostbusters too, but there's the part where Peter McNichol gets the door closed in his face in a dark hallway, and his eyes light up. It's haunting. And it's as creepy as it's. I get why my brain mixed it up so much with Poltergeist because there's so much imagery that's just shocking, especially if you're a kid.
Well, even I think when the Stay Puft Marshmallow, he steps on something, or when he gets angry and like they show his face.
Yeah,
that transformation is shocking and scary.
So, fun fact is that the guy who was in the suit for Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, when he's on fire, that is the same guy who does the fire stunt for Freddy in Nightmare on Elm Street. It's the same guy who does the fire stunt for Terminator when he's coming through the fire. I was like, just set that guy on fire. That's what he's there for.
Yeah, they're like, don't worry, we know a guy.
I didn't realize Slimer was a puppet. Like that's a physical puppet. Somebody's like, manipulating that, and then they surround it with the visual effects. I think that's the thing. Like, I don't think about Stay Puft Marshmallow Man as a special effect. Like, that thing seems real. Slimer seems real. Library Ghost seems real. And I think that's the true magic of a movie that really works, is you don't think about how they did that. You just kind of take it at face value.
And I think the sound design also helps. Like every time they turn on those packs, like you can like feel it. Like there's
that
weight
noise.
to it.
When I was watching the series for this, one of the notes I made was that Ghostbusters as a franchise makes it feel like magic is real. And I think that, there's maybe like a handful of movies that I can point to and be like, okay, that's one that really succeeded in that way. And this one, absolutely in the top 5 of magic is real kind of movies.
Yeah. Richard Edlund, Edlund, Richard Edlund was responsible for the special effects for this. And he'd already done, Raiders of the Lost Ark and I think Close Encounters. He was one of those where he was just starting out his own studio, Boss Studio. And this was kind of their big debut. And so they wanted to make an impression, and they absolutely did. And I love the fact that, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, like you said, is iconic because it's such a surprise. Like, we're as surprised as the audience as the characters are in the movie, that this big goofy looking thing ends up being a menace. But we also have really cool effects like the terror dogs.
Oh, when the claws come out of the couch and grab her like that. I've seen behind the scene photos of that too, and that's incredible.
Yeah, was that the first one or the second, where in the chair or whatever they all grab her? And
that's the first one.
That's the first one.
Yeah, they grab her, it spins around and shoots her into the kitchen.
That's wonderful.
I was gonna say the second one, the Scoleri brothers.
Yeah.
That whole sequence is fantastic.
And
there's definitely a Spielbergian quality to these movies. I think that's what it is. It must be that because he's the through line from like you said, the Indiana Jones movies.
Yeah. Well, and Dennis Muren did the special effects for part 2, and he is ILM. He is Industrial Light and Magic. And so, yeah, the fact that it feels Spielbergian, especially for part 2, 100%, that's him.
In the same way that Mackenzie, you were talking about how you would mix up Poltergeist and Ghostbusters. My childhood memories of Ghostbusters 2 get mixed up with The Blob. and so there would be times where I'd be like, where's the scene? Right. When is that going to happen? It's in a different movie.
Well, yeah, because the pink goo is so prominent in part 2.
Yeah.
And actually there are some absolute call outs to the original Blob. There's people running out of the theater. There's that pink slime pushing through a grate. Those are all scenes that are pulled directly from the 1958 Blob. I love those kind of callbacks to classic horror films because it means they're coming from a place of authenticity. Like they're like, I love these movies, and here's a shout out to them.
Yeah. The
change between Ghostbusters 1, Ghostbusters 2, when Chris Hainsworth was on the Alien panel, he said the issue that he has with Ghostbusters 2 is that they basically go back to the start, have no reputation, and they have to build their way back up again. What if you just went in a different direction? So, I mean, I feel like the characters are very familiar and yet slightly different than we last met them. I mean, like Annie Potts's character is no longer interested in Spengler. Instead, she's interested in Rick Moranis. And Peter McNichol, I think, is the superstar of Ghostbusters 2.
Not a bad character in the franchise.
Yeah, he's not the Jar Jar Binks of Ghostbusters.
Everything you're doing is bad. I want you to know this.
Well, what I didn't know was that, Vigo, the painting character, that's Max von Sydow's voice coming out of his face. I was like,
that makes sense now that you say that. Yeah,
it was. And I looked that up in this terrific book called Ghostbusters: The Inside Story by Matt McAllister. Once you know that, you can never unhear it. It's like that is totally Ming the Merciless. There's just a ton of great set pieces, throughout each of these films. I love the capturing of Slimer in the ballroom, and the mayhem that's going on inside, and you're learning not to cross the streams and all that stuff, like all that information that comes out. And then you keep flashing outside to the hotel manager, like just trying to keep a low profile of all the, stuff that's going on behind him.
I think the thing, if I'm being honest, that I've watched the most from Ghostbusters 1, it's the part when the villainous EPA shuts down the machine and the building blows up and Mick Smiley's magic starts playing. That shot over the like the cityscape, and you see like the ghosts all coming out. It always seemed haunting to me as a kid. Just the beginning of that song, that like heartbeat of that song, it just felt like, oh my God, what's coming? What's going to happen now in a comedy?
We haven't talked about William Atherton yet as Walter Peck,
the best '80s jackass.
Oh man,
is that the man with no dick?
It is.
Yep.
It is. Right. Between this and Die Hard, it's kind of like you just cemented your place in film history as the world's biggest jackass on screen.
He came back in part 3 as well, didn't he?
He comes in Frozen Empire for sure.
Okay.
He's now the mayor of New York.
Okay.
In Frozen Empire. Of course, it's the same thing where I think all the Ghostbuster movies are kind of what Aaron said. Everyone has forgotten everything the Ghostbusters have done, and they all have to rebrand themselves.
Yeah. I think my favorite scene or moment that comes to mind right now with Ghostbusters is when Dana and Peter are having a date and she's possessed already. And so he's trying to talk to her and there is no Dana, only Zool. And she's one track and he's just playing along with. I think that's a really fun interaction.
Well, and that's the one moment where you go, because Peter Venkman could have absolutely taken advantage of Dana at that point, and he doesn't. I was like, okay, he redeems himself on some level.
Yeah, Thorazine on him though.
That's right. And then he dopes her up and like leaves the house. Leaves her alone.
He did kiss her chest in that scene, and I thought like that hit me in a weird way this time. Like I forgot that he did that.
What about Ghostbusters 2? What are moments that arise?
First one that comes into my head is in the subway when Winston gets hit by that train.
Oh, no.
Horror and humor, like again, like back to back within the same few seconds.
Similar for me is when Dan Aykroyd is hanging over the slime. Like just that felt nightmarish to me, and it still does when I say it. It feels very Temple of Doom or something like that. The glowing of the slime, but like kind of the echoiness of the sound design feels very nightmarish.
And then doesn't it reach out to him? Am I making that up? When he's
Yeah.
dangling, doesn't it? Like, yeah.
Yeah, like it's
Yeah.
gonna swallow him or something. In that scene too, the Venkman and Egon arguing with the cops and anyone else who comes around, like, no, we gotta work here. Holy shit, so fun. Which one had the kitchen scene where the eggs were popping out?
That's the first one.
That's one.
Well,
Do we like the fact that we brought a baby into this one?
There's something about late 80s horror movies where like babies or movies in general, babies became a really popular thing.
it's true.
Like with that, Look Who's Talking, Nightmare on Elm Street 5 introduced a baby story.
Mhm.
I have a conspiracy. I think a lot of filmmakers started having kids around this time.
Yep.
You're like, you know what's scary? A baby.
We have to protect the future.
I really did like in part 2 where the stroller goes
Yes.
away from Dana and she has to chase it because it got the ooze on the wheels, right? But the ooze didn't track anywhere, right? And I was like, what is this magical substance? How did that was one of those things like watching it as an adult. I'm like, how did they do that? What substance would that be that wouldn't track?
As hilarious as Rick Moranis was in the first one, I feel like we get diminishing returns with his character this time around, where he's like, an incompetent trial lawyer. I'm kind of like, it felt like they were going for maybe some easier jokes this time around. And that's why I think I really like Peter McNichol's characters, because it feels fresh, it feels different. Whereas we get a lot more of the same from the other characters that we've already met. There's fewer surprises. The first movie is full of surprises. It's all surprises. We're being introduced to these characters, being introduced to the concept of ghosts and ghost busting. And part 2 feels very much like a sequel in that, yep, here's some more of the same.
I do like Rick Moranis in his scene with Annie Potts. That's fun.
That's because it's Rick Moranis and Annie Potts, and they're hilarious.
Exactly, yeah.
Ghostbusters 2 also has, I don't know why this happened before this panel, but recently I think about one specific line from Ghostbusters 2. Whenever I see anyone happy with any object, I think about what happens if we take the puppy away. Like I think about that so frequently when I see someone happy, and it just always brings a smile to my face, whatever they're fixated on. What happens if we take that away?
There's a great photo of him with his daughter when he's in the full Ghostbusters costume and he's like bent over her, and he's great.
Did his hair get like super, super cool for the second one?
It's like a racer head.
I was like, man, that thing is just like a helmet.
The song for Ghostbusters 2, also a banger. I just want to acknowledge that. The Bobby Brown song.
That's Bobby Brown, right?
Yeah, that song still fucking slaps.
Is that the Get Me Higher?
No, that's Jackie Wilson.
Oh.
But it's the well, I guess we're gonna have to take it home. Yeah. And he's the doorman.
Yes, he
He
is.
does a little cameo spot in part 2. Yeah.
Yeah, between Ray Parker's song and Bobby Brown's song, it's been hell on my wife because I just keep singing either or both, and sometimes I mix them together because, that's the new thing. In looking ahead to Ghostbusters Answer the Call, where it's essentially a reboot, it is an origin story. We have all female Ghostbusters this time around. I guess first I'll ask, what are people's thoughts on the movie? It wasn't embraced by the public, and so I'm curious to hear what the panel's thoughts on it are first, and then we'll talk about pros and cons.
I was obsessed with it. I loved it. I remember I cried when I saw it in the theater. I think I saw it opening weekend. I was like, I have to see Ghostbusters. I have to see Ghostbusters. And I remember, going back to talking about like the sounds. I remember the first time you hear the Ecto 1, I got teary eyed. And even the first time they turn on the packs and they like try to get a ghost, like those sound effects were just like, oh yeah, we're here.
Did you like it, Mackenzie?
I have an experience with this movie, and I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure if I can talk about it, to be honest. I used to work for a marketing company that does test screenings for movies, and we tested this movie, and over the course of several weeks, so I ended up seeing it quite a bit before it even came out, and it was a weird time because I was seeing, like, I think as a person I was really shocked that there was this much passion behind Ghostbusters, because for me it was like it was another toy in the toy box a little bit. So when that kind of happened, I was a little blown away by how divisive it was, that it was that it even existed. And then meanwhile I'm seeing it repeatedly and seeing things get adjusted, things change, and then
so you were seeing different versions of it.
Yeah, there were things that were changing between cuts, and also there were special effects that were being updated because, like, from cut to cut, there were things that were unfinished, like some of the big CGI ghosts in the end that were or weren't there between the shots, and things like that. I actually really enjoyed that kind of day glow look to the ghosts in that version. That's something I really liked about that movie was just the way that the colorfulness and the way that the ghost looked was a big thing for me. And I love Kate McKinnon as well. I thought it was a big missed opportunity. I thought Chris Hemsworth should have been Rick Moranis' son.
Maybe he's clearly his spiritual son.
Yeah, I thought they should have just gone for it. And I thought Annie Potts should have put him in the suit and been like, you look just like your father or something like that.
Oh, good call. I loved it. And I saw it in the theater with a friend who's also a big Ghostbusters fan. It was a slow start for that movie to kick in for us to where we could really go on the ride with it. And once the ride kicked in, it was like, this is just fun. And what is all this like passionate hate for? And never really understood that. And I rewatched it for the panel and I was like, fuck, it's even better on like a second watch. I absolutely adored, like, here's a movie that is like 100% outside of the male gaze. It is just fun. Women getting to have all this space to be full characters. And even as cliche as it is for Kevin, right? The Chris Hemsworth character, to be a beefcake who's an idiot, but we all want to like sleep with him. It was just fun just to have that space for it to be a thing.
Yeah, because when you look back at the first two, I mean, our female characters are very much there to be an object to be desired or to drive the plot forward in one way or another, or just to support our male heroes.
Right.
And so, yes, to flip that over, I have no problem with female Ghostbusters. I think the issue that I had with it is that they feel a little cartoony from the get-go. Like, I think everything feels a bit dialed up. Like, I think we start at 8 and 9 and we don't have a whole lot of places to go. And nobody's really a low-key character. Like, we don't have a Spengler. We don't have, I mean, even Ray is pretty low-key. And so everybody's kind of pitched pretty high. Now, I love all of those actresses. And so watching them do their thing, like, there are so many wonderful little moments throughout the movie that I would absolutely give the movie a thumbs up. But I could see, well, just from a critical standpoint, where people might have had some issues, especially comparing it, because as I was going through, I was like going, well, the beats are very similar. Like, in terms of like the arc of the story, you have an opening shock, and then you're introduced to the characters. They're disgraced, and then we have to, they bond together and they go out into private enterprise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many great callbacks to the first two movies. So there's so much to like in it, and I think the goodwill does carry over. But I'm curious if other people have thoughts on why it didn't resonate as much with the public?
Part of it, to me, I think has to do with how comedy changed in film. Because I do think watching it, there are those moments where you can tell they just were improvising. Like, here's the setup for this thing. Let's just roll the camera and see how many one-liners they can get. And so you kind of have sometimes, I think, that awkward pacing that a lot of comedies today, I think, can have when you just go, they'll say something funny at some point, which, the original, I felt, even though Bill Murray was improvising, like they didn't have that because it was all kind of progressing plot. But again, I think that's just a thing that happens with movies now with comedies.
Well, and certainly, I mean, several of these actors were in Bridesmaids, which is directed by Paul Feig, who directed this. And yeah, if you've watched the outtakes for Bridesmaids, you absolutely get that repetition of here's a funny line, funny line, funny line, funny line. And they picked that one to plug in here. And I didn't notice that. But now that you say that, Daniel, I'm like thinking back and going, okay. Yeah. Because like Kate McKinnon stuff is just like so bizarre.
There's just like a certain cinematography, I feel, to comedies around.
Like to hold space for.
Yeah, like it's all very like how it's set up and it's kind of just a close up. Whereas comedies used to be more like from the waist up, trying to get more physical comedy. And this one is more like intellectual, let the words do it sometimes.
What are some favorite moments from Ghostbusters Answer the Call?
Leslie Jones, that ghost.
I was going to say
on
Leslie
her shoulders
Jones.
And across the whole movie. She's hilarious. The mannequin, when she's like, the mannequin's chasing her or something. She has great lines.
Full disclosure, I also got really sick during the period where we were screening this movie, like feverish sick. So a lot of my memories of that movie are very
literally like feverish.
Are fever dreams and like, but I remember being very soothed.
Like that's not in the movie, Mac. That never happened.
Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking about like why did this one not land as well as the first two, and I wonder if the effects of the third one being much more computerized than the first two. To me, it has the same kind of like charming feel. Whereas like I saw Afterlife, and that one has a different feel to it than the first three. And I've not seen Frozen Empire yet, so I can't speak to that. But so the feel of part three, it felt like it fit, but then the characters aren't from the first two. Maybe that has something to do with it, but I think that like even the ghosts they're very different, and so I don't know if that played a part for people as well.
Well, I also wonder, like, were we looking for a Ghostbusters remake?
Right.
I think it's because I think the sequel didn't land as well either. Like Ghostbusters 2 wasn't as big a hit with audiences, and so I think people were kind of like, I'm just going to have my Ghostbusters and be happy with that, and so. The notion of remaking it, there's that reticence of messing with something I really is special to me, but also going, do we need to have a remake? As horror fans, we've all been through the remake fatigue.
Yeah.
I also wonder. I was thinking about George Takei. They talked about the early days, or like when they started to talk about doing Next Generation. And to George Takei and to William Shatner, their first reaction was like, how do you do that without us?
Right.
And like we're Star Trek, and like and I wonder a little bit if Ghostbusters just to a lot of people are those guys.
Yep. Yeah.
Like for me personally, the thing with the ghosts was I thought doing them as puppets was just a missed opportunity, but I still like the look of them. But
I mean, we are in an age where practical effects, even when they're practical effects, they're sweetened, digitally to the point where you wouldn't even know. You're like, oh, that was a real thing. Like I would have never guessed that wasn't just whipped up on a computer.
Right. That happened to me with The Last of Us. There was a monster in that I was like, oh yeah, big CGI monster, cool. And then later on they were like, oh, it was actually a suit, and I was like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Like, take that veneer of CGI away. Like, let me see it's a puppet.
Right.
Well, that happened to me with the Underworld movies and, the Wolfman 2010. Oh, CGI. And then you like see the behind the scenes. You're like, no, that's actually a a suit and, there's somebody in it. I'm like, I would have never known. And why did you bother, why did you bother doing that if you were just going to turn into a cartoon?
I do think that some of my favorite parts in part 3, maybe this is not as intended, but some of my favorite moments are with Chris Hemsworth.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought his character was so funny
Yes.
and so inept, but also he played it so straight that I really appreciated that character, even whether he was possessed or he was actually himself. He was hilarious. I do want to highlight in part 3, there was the mannequin scene. And I thought that was a really nice, kind of like the library scene in the original, where it's like, this is a really good creep out moment. This makes me uncomfortable to watch, even though it's still very fun.
All of the stuff that happens with Chris Hemsworth's character, I think it was you, Daniel, that said, like, it's just funny, dialogue. It's funny interaction with characters, and almost has nothing to do with ghosts or, the situation. It's just funny interplay between characters. And I feel like, for me, those are the best parts of this movie, is just the byplay between the characters and less about the plot. The plot does feel a bit like one more Ghostbusters plot, but the byplay between the actors and the characters is just terrific. That said, I think if we look ahead to Ghostbusters Afterlife, that feels slightly different to me in terms of a Ghostbusters plot. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this one, because I really hadn't heard much about it. After not hearing good things about the female Ghostbusters and being a little disappointed by Ghostbusters 2, I was like, I don't really need another Ghostbusters. But I was surprised at how much I enjoyed Afterlife, and I think it does come from a different place.
Yeah, that one definitely has, I feel, more heart. And that might be because of Reitman working with his son as well, like, making it a not that it's a family movie, but the family is so core to the theme in that one.
Well, it is about it's about family, and it's a family, it's like there's a passing of the torch from Ivan to Jason in terms of directing. Like, I think you're right. Like, it is about family, and I like the fact that our heroes are younger. They're kids.
It's really like it's sort of meta in that way, that it's through Jason Reitman's eyes as having been a kid on the set of Ghostbusters. Like, it's Ghostbusters through the eyes of children. I thought it was an interesting way to go, for sure. And it was also sort of that post Stranger Thingsification of a lot of things, with like the 80s nostalgia kicked in around that time, and I thought that was a big part of it.
Ashley, you said this one was different for you. Was it different good or different not so hot?
I liked it, but I will say of the 4 that I've seen, it's probably my least favorite. But that's not to say that I didn't like it, because I really did. But it does have a very different feeling, even just starting out with like the family moving into the house, like into the dirt farm. The interplay between the mom and the 2 kids has a very different feel from anything in any other Ghostbusters. With it being a Ghostbusters movie and not feeling like a Ghostbusters movie, I think I'll like it more upon subsequent watches. But the first watch, and I've only seen it once, the first watch is like, okay, where are you going? When is this going to become a Ghostbusters movie? And it did. Still, even in the end, a very different film overall. Not in a bad way, just different, and because of that, it's kind of hard for me to put it into the same category as the other Ghostbusters movies, if that makes sense. But I loved Paul Rudd, always. But him and the kid who played Phoebe, them 2 together when they were having this like dorky conversation at the school, and Phoebe geometry joke about, I thought you were being obtuse, and then winks. Yeah, it's a joke, that's why I winked. Like, so funny.
Well, it's interesting, that you bring, it just feels different, Ashley, because rewatching the first 2 movies, they're so adult in their subtext, and Afterlife just doesn't really have any of that in it. It's like it just feels different. Yeah, I agree with that. And I remember when I saw that in theater, I was so disheartened that that and Frozen Empire, I got to sit dead center of the theater, and it was just me.
Oh,
Like, it's just an
Wow.
empty theater. But I remember I had a great time in Afterlife. I've seen that one, I think, probably 3 times now, because it is a different movie to me as well, and I like it in a different way than I like the originals.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, this one, I would say probably if I had to rank them, this is actually my second favorite. Like, I like this. I think this is a nice sequel to the first one. And I can let Ghostbusters 2 go by the way and just pull up my favorite scenes from McNichol on YouTube.
Well, I think they had their, of course, rights issues again, where they couldn't pull stuff from Ghostbusters 2 for this one,
Oh.
which is why it feels, because they don't really mention Ghostbusters 2 at all. They do a
anything that
little
happens.
bit in Frozen Empire, but I remember reading articles that they were like, oh, well, in a sequel, we might be able to talk about it.
Did we like seeing our original Ghostbusters show up at the end? As cliched as that has become these days of bringing back kind of these legacy characters,
I kind of didn't
Dozer.
like it. I just because it has been a very well worn trope, I guess now to bring back the. It's strange to me. This happened with the Indiana Jones movies as well. To see an actor wearing the same costume they wore when they were much younger, there's just something about it that, like, I once saw a video of Adam West dressed as Batman at a comic book convention, much older, and it just like, and he was trying to come up with like things to say as Batman, and like nobody was there to help him, and I just that feeling is kind of stuck with me. So when I see things like that, that's how I feel again, where I'm like, oh, like, don't make him do this, like like let Michael Keaton do cool things again in this point in his life. Don't make him put on old costumes and do that again. Like that's when you bring back somebody who's dead through CGI, that I have a big problem with.
Yeah. I was like, how did they? Oh, that's how they did that. Never mind.
I haven't been a fan of that for a while, since they brought back Laurence Olivier and Sky Captain in The World of Tomorrow. I've been disturbed by that.
I think it's different, right? If like an actor dies during the production versus, I mean, Harold Ramis has been dead for how long now?
Well, I mean, the 2016 one is dedicated to him, so
yeah.
Have his bust in it, the bust of his head.
Yeah.
And answer the call.
I think that's enough. It's like having Bernard Lee in the Bond movies, having a portrait of him in the back.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Like,
yeah.
But to like fully puppet, same thing with Peter Cushing in Star Wars. When they did that, I was like, you had Charles Dance right there, and you like to just recast and like, just get somebody else who's a good snooty British guy.
Right. Yeah. I thought that bringing the guys in at the end felt like I understood why they did it, but it felt very cheesy to me, especially the stuff with Egon, like hugging his daughter and things like that. Like that just felt, I don't know, maybe I'm kind of jaded. I just like,
maybe we're all a little jaded.
Maybe.
You're like, can we just let Harold Ramis rest in peace, please?
Like, can't you tell a story here? Like, I loved the stuff where Phoebe was like finding the tools, like, and the light was shining wherever the stuff was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I thought that was great. Playing chess was great. Those details where he's part of the movie, but he's not visually seen, I was so into. And then when he showed up as a character, I was like, it just didn't land for me.
Well, and I really like Phoebe's journey as a Ghostbuster. And I like, I like the familial. I like the fact that, like her brother and, the relationship he has with his coworker at the diner. Like, I really like, and I think you're right, Mac. It's the Stranger Things quality, like that's who we're marketing to at this point. It's like we're selling it on the cool kids who are going to help save the world.
And they have a Stranger Things in it.
Yep.
Yes, they certainly do.
They have a Stranger Things in it for sure.
Isn't that actor's name actually Wolf as well?
Wolfhard.
Finn
Finn,
Wolfhard.
Finn Wolfhard. Okay, that's it.
It's the
'Cause I
most
was-
metal name ever. Finn Wolfhard.
Yeah, I was kind of tickled when he's doing the inventory scene. He's like counting burgers or something, burger
Yep.
patties, and like, oh, here you can have this sweatshirt. It's very masculine. It has a wolf on it. I thought that was really cute.
Yeah, I think the performances are all really solid. I think Carrie Coon does a nice job, and she
Yeah.
plays well with Paul Rudd, as you said, Ashley. I think Paul Rudd is great, and he's not jokey. He feels grounded and like a real character. I think that's the thing. I really don't feel like there are many cartoon characters in this one. Like, I
Yeah,
feel like everybody's
maybe
pretty
podcast.
more. Yeah, podcast is certainly the most goofy of the bunch for sure.
Yeah,
And isn't his name Gooberson?
Yes,
Gruberson.
Gruberson.
Yeah. Gary Gruberson.
And then, Daniel, would you enlighten us on your feelings, other than the fact that nobody else went to see Frozen Empire, but you did? So what did you think
I saw
of it?
it opening night, like an 11 o'clock showing. It existed in time and space, and I had a moment with it.
Yeah.
It was a type of movie where, checking my watch after a certain amount of time, being like, oh, it's gonna end. They do something just really weird, because pretty much until Afterlife, you don't really see like a humanoid ghost. And then in this one, all of a sudden, they befriend a humanoid ghost, and there's a huge plot point with it. But they could also, deal with material objects. Like there was a material object that they died with that was still with them, that was material. So there were some like weird plot points with that. And then there were, the normal ghosts that they have throughout. And the jokes were not great.
Oh,
I came in wanting to love it. I still like it because I'm a sucker for franchises. But I left and I really did feel that was not a good movie.
Yeah, the buzz has been so kind of meh on it that even though I knew we were doing this panel, I was like, I just can't bring myself to stream it for $20. And we're still, a few weeks out from its physical media release. So while I will see it and, kind of tie up the franchise, it wasn't one that I was enthusiastic to see because the buzz was just not strong. And I heard that there's like there's so much going on in terms of too many characters to manage. It's kind of the Marvel Universe problem at this point, where like you want everybody to have a moment, everybody to have a storyline.
And then, of course, they bring in the legacy characters, but then they also add, 5 more. You're just like, it's too much.
Bill Murray looks like he's phoning in the poster of that movie. Like, it's a little kooky. I mean, rewatching this Ghostbusters, I realized I'm like, he's never really been that checked in with this franchise. But like by the stuff I was seeing of Frozen Empire, I was like, does he even want to have friends anymore?
He's actually CGI in this movie.
The best part I thought was Kumail.
Nanjiani?
As a new character. He was pretty great.
I agree with you, Mac, that Bill Murray, like I think his shining moment is in the first one. Like he's there, he's doing fun stuff, he's being irreverent, he's being cheeky with it. And then after that, the investment definitely goes down. I mean, his cameo in Answer the Call is kind of like, feels like he's there to be a cameo and endorsement for it. Bringing it all back around, any final thoughts on Ghostbusters 1984 and the franchise overall?
Well, I'm glad it's with us, the Ghostbusters franchise. Great series.
It's a good franchise to bring kids and adults together in being able to be scared, but also have fun. I mean, a lot of horror is not accessible for younger people. It's just too much. I think that this franchise is a good place to kind of bring those. It's a nice bridge.
Yeah, that was actually what I was going to say. I think it's a great gateway for people to bring in and watch it with their kids, or to watch it as a kid and go, oh, this scary stuff is actually kind of fun as well. And I think that's what I like about the original, is that it plays by the same rules, comedy and horror. It's the build up and the deliver. It's the build up and the deliver, and we get them in equal measure here. You know, you are scared, and then you laugh at yourself for being scared, and then somebody says something funny because they were scared on screen. And it kind of calls back to, I meant to say this earlier, but it calls back to like those old, like Bob Hope and Abbott and Costello and Martin Lewis, where they are encountering strange things and one of them is freaking out and the other one's trying to say, you know, there's no ghost. What are you talking about? Like, I think it harkens back to that kind of classic comedy. And I think that's why, you know, continues to be evergreen moving forward.
You all hit it. It's like a Halloween tradition that I think is one that like you're probably introduced to Ghostbusters at a younger age, and that it is kind of like, you know, a nice soup that you have yearly. I don't know why I said soup.
I'm like, now I want soup.
A fine
That's what I thought.
Which one of the Ghostbusters tells that story about how parents really like it because the kids aren't playing, like they're not fighting against each other, they're fighting imaginary ghosts together?
I don't know, but I like that story. Well, thank you so much. This was great fun rolling through the Ghostbusters franchise and then being able to chat about it with you fine folks. So thank you for taking the journey with me.
Thank you.
Thank
For
you.
having me.
And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.